Today we're going to be working on different ways of describing data. And there's two main ways of describing it. You can describe it in terms of its center, and you can describe it in terms of its spread. And so in this video, we're going to concentrate on different ways of describing the center of data. And as you move further in statistics, which is what this is, sometimes you might hear this called measures of central tendency. Okay, so anytime you see something like that, they're talking about where the center of the data is. Where is the majority of your data? Like those numbers that you see, what do they kind of center around? What's the center of the data? Okay, and there's three different ways of describing the center of data, and you've dealt with these before, so we're going to be reviewing that, and then we're also going to talk about when would you use each one of these to describe your data, because there's going to be certain sets of data that you're going to want to use one rather than the other. Okay, so the three different ways that you can describe the center of the data is by finding the mean of it, which, remember, to find the mean of the data, you add up all your numbers and then you divide by however many numbers you have. Okay, and that's also called average. So you could also think of it as the average of your numbers. Okay, another way to describe data is by finding the center of your data is to find the median of it, which, remember, is literally the number in the middle. So to find the median, you start by putting the numbers in order from smallest number to biggest number. Then you kind of mark them out until you get to the middle, and it's the number in the middle, or if there ends up being two numbers in the middle, remember you have to average the two middle numbers. Okay, so that's the median. And then the mode is one that you haven't talked about in a while, but the mode, remember, is either the number or the numbers, because it could be more than one, that occur the most often in your data set. So if you have a number that occurs more than other numbers, then that would be called your mode. Okay, so those are all different ways of describing the middle of your data. Now, they might ask you to describe it, and usually you're going to pick one way. You might describe it in a couple different ways, but usually you're going to try to pick one main way to describe the center of your data. And so when would you use mean rather than median, or vice versa? When would you definitely want to describe the center using the median rather than the mean? Well, that's what this is talking about over here, okay? So one thing you need to know about the mean, because of the way that it works, so remember, you're going to take all of your numbers, you add them up, and then you divide by however many values there are, is the mean is actually very much affected by outliers. Because, like, think about if you were thinking about the people in your town, and you're trying to find the average salary of somebody that lives in your town, well, then you would go out and ask people how much they make and then average those numbers up, and there you go. But if you ask somebody that, makes a whole lot more money than maybe the average person or people in your town, and you include them and you find the mean, then that's going to kind of not reflect the true salary of somebody that lives in your town. And so for that reason, because the mean, the average, can be affected by outliers, you would only want to use the mean to describe the center of your data if there are no outliers, okay? So if you have outliers, you're going to use another way of describing the center of your data rather than mean, okay? So kind of summing that up, you're going to use the mean to describe your data if there are no outliers. And remember, an outlier is one that is a number that doesn't fit the norm of your data, okay? So it's called an extreme data value. It's a number that's in your data. It's a number that doesn't fit the norm. It's not like a regular number. It's either going to be way, way bigger than the rest of your numbers or really, really smaller compared to the rest of your numbers. So it doesn't fit the norm of your data. It's a number that doesn't fit the norm. It's not a normal number in your set of data, okay? So that's when you use the mean. The median, you will actually use When you do have outliers, you will use the median to describe your data if it does have outliers in it, because the median would actually, when you find it, because it's just the number in the middle, you would have, like, think about how you find the median. You cross it out until you get to the middle of it. And so because you would have crossed out any outliers it has, the median won't be affected by outliers, okay? So if you end up having outliers in your set of data, you're going to use the median to describe it, okay? So that's one thing. The other thing, though, that you have to be careful about with the median is you don't want any big gaps in your data. Like if you ask some people, like, I don't know, how many siblings they have, and you have a couple people that tell you they have one, and then a couple other people that have you say they have 10, there's a big gap in your data. And so you actually wouldn't use the median to describe your data if there are big gaps. You'd have to use some other way of describing it, okay? So mode, when would you use that? Mode is very, very seldom used when describing the center of your data. The only time that you would use the mode is if there are a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot, okay? A lot of repeated values in your data, okay? So the only time is if you have in your set of data 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 2, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Then you could use the mode to describe a normal data value, okay? But if not, if it doesn't have a lot of repeated values, then you're going to use one of the other ones, okay? So use mean when there's no outliers. Use median when there are outliers but no big gaps in your data. And then use mode if there's a lot of repeated values, okay? So let's talk about when would we use each one. So we're going to do a couple examples here. So let's say that you have, in number one, that set of data, okay? And they're wanting you to describe the center. So if we have to describe the center, well, they might ask us to find those three things. So if they ask us to find the mean, then remember we average our numbers. So I would add them all up. Okay, so I would take 1 plus 1 plus 3 plus 5 plus 18. And I just kind of skipped over that 0 because it won't change anything. So I'm going to add up all my numbers there. And when I add them up, I get 28, but then remember you have to divide by however many there are. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 numbers. So I have to divide by 6. And when I do that, I get 4.6, and I'll round to the nearest hundredth, 4.67. If I was finding the median, then remember I have to take my numbers and put them in order. So I'm going to go to the side, and I'm going to put them in order. So I got 0, 1, 1, 3, 5, and 18. And then you cross them out until you get to the middle. So if I cross them out until I get to the middle, I have 2 numbers in the middle. So remember, to find the median, you average those. So that would be 4 over 2, and my median would be 2. So the median is 2. So notice these are 2 very different numbers, okay? And then if we also had to find the mode is the number that occurs the most often. So I'm looking for the number that occurs the most often. And notice the 1 occurs twice compared to everything else only occurs once. So the mode would be 1, okay? So if I had to kind of pick just one of these to describe my data, well, I'm going to pretty much look, okay, I know it's not mode because there's not a repeated number a whole lot, okay, so I know it's not going to be mode. So then which one would I use? Well, remember, you would use mean if there's no outliers, and you would use median if there are outliers. So if you notice, 18 is not a normal number compared to the rest of these. So that means that 18 would be an outlier. And so because it has an outlier, we would want to use the median to describe our the center. Because the outlier, notice, has really thrown off the mean. So that wouldn't be a good way of describing a typical value in my data, okay? So the median would be the best way to describe the data. So this would be best way to describe the center of your data because there's outliers. So best way to describe the center here. Okay, so if they just asked you to describe the center and they're not asking you necessarily to find all of them, then all you have to do is determine which would be the best, and then you'll find that. Okay, but if it does ask you to find all three, make sure that you find all three. Okay, but let's say for this one it just asks you to describe the center, and you're going to pick the one that's the best way of describing it. So what you're going to go ahead and do is look to see if there is any outliers. And so look at your numbers and see if there's any that don't really fit with the norm. And notice it kind of goes from 69 to 90. And most of the numbers are kind of close together. So like that 90 is not way far away from, like 85 would be the next one. So that's not way too far away from that. 69 is really close to the 70 and the 72. So you don't have an extreme data value. So that means that this one doesn't have outliers. And so think about which measure of center would we use to actually describe that. And so if it doesn't have outliers, then remember we talked about you would use the mean to describe it. So you would find the mean. So that's where you add them up. So I'd take 70 plus 75 plus 69 plus 80 plus 85 plus 90 and then plus that 72. And then you just double check to make sure you don't miss any. And so when I add them up, I get 541, and then I divide by however many numbers there are. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 numbers. So I divide by 7, and then my mean would be 77.29. So if these were like test scores or quiz grades or something like that, I would say the average quiz grade is around a 77.29. And then you could look, does it seem like most of my data values are kind of close to that? And yeah, they're kind of centered around the 70s. And so that would be a good way to describe the center of my data.